Welcome to the Lord and Richards Show, a program that will enable you to become more financially independent and prosperous from a biblical point of view. Tune in each week to learn how to prosper through good markets and bad. Now, here's our co-hosts, Colin Richards, your biblical investment advisor, and Dylan Schoonover.
Well, good to see you again, Colin.
Great to see you, Dylan.
Today, we're having the Lord and Richards Show, and it's going to be a fun time. I'm joined by Colin Richards, CEO and founder of Lord and Richards. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about something everybody needs to know but doesn't usually realize.
My pleasure, Dylan.
How to eat a banana. No, I'm kidding. Oh, we're talking about fees, of course. Fees in your investment portfolio. Shockingly, I think when we dive into this, people are going to hear a lot of things that they didn't realize was going on within the investment world that they have inside their portfolios. So let's dive right in on a very basic question. Why do fees matter and what you pay for investment advice?
Well, I think fees matter throughout your life. None of us likes to overpay for anything. You know, my wife, I joke, will cross town, spend $10 worth of gas to save $5 on an item. But if you're a spaver, if you like to save money, if you're a bargain shopper, then this particular topic should really appeal to you, and you should set down whatever you're doing and start listening. Pull the car over to the side of the road, because most of us are not aware, unfortunately, of the number of ways that we get charged fees on our very ordinary, typical investments.
You mean it's not the same price for everyone everywhere?
Wouldn't that be great if just everybody had a fee structure that was transparent, open, visible, and that was fair across the board?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was a pretty heavily regulated industry, but it doesn't mean that you have to charge the same thing to have an investment portfolio for someone, right?
Well, not only is it regulated, but it's lobbied. And there are special interests that help these brokerage houses and others profit in ways that I think are a little bit below the radar. I'm not saying they're evil, but what I'm saying is they're not obvious. And I think transparency, putting everything under the microscope or under bright light, is the best way to go.
So sometimes just because you're playing on the same court, it doesn't mean you're really playing the same game at all.
No, yeah. One guy's playing badminton, the other's playing ping pong, right?
we got a shuttlecock and a ping pong ball going different directions. So let's talk about that. So we'll just take an average portfolio. When somebody walks in, they think they know what they're paying. Most of the time, I think when you're talking to someone and they're coming in to talk with you about their investments, they go, "I'm paying this," and they're usually pretty confident in it. Why is it that they're usually not paying what they think they are?
Well, the first thing that happens is we're going to trust but verify, as Ronald Reagan used to say. So we're going to gather some statements and do a deep analysis of your investments. So as we work together, as we come alongside of you, we're not there to criticize or to find fault, but we want to just put everything under that microscope and expose what's there so you know what you're really paying in terms of fees. And most often the fee that people have in their mind is the fee that their advisor has quoted for their advice, which could be 1%, 1.5%, whatever. And then they feel, well, that's my fee. That's my whole fee.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah, it should. But the problem is then we get into the investments themselves and we have a whole different hierarchy of fees on top of that advisor's fee. And so we begin with expense ratios. Most of the portfolios that people bring into our office are full of mutual funds. Nothing wrong with mutual funds, but you need to know that you are paying for the convenience of investing in a large number of stocks under one banner, which we call a mutual fund. It was a great invention, allowed people to diversify without having to go out and stock pick and bond pick. But the problem with these is that it costs money to run those funds. And not only do we have to pay for the underlying securities, but we've got to pay for the profit that that fund manager and his whole cohort wants to make. So now you've got your advisor making a fee, then we got expense ratios that can vary wildly from 0.5% all the way up to 1.5%, 2%. So now we're starting to look at total fees that could start to get to 3%, and we haven't even gotten through the list yet.
Wow, that's wild. And not only that, if they don't meet the benchmark they're designed to meet, then they're underperforming the market and you're paying those extra fees, right?
The truth is that 75% of mutual funds underperform the index that they're supposed to mirror. So an index is simply a collection of stocks that track the direction of maybe a segment of the market, say healthcare or finance. And an index is also a good way to double check on how well the fund managers are doing, because the index is completely passive. Nobody's managing it. Meanwhile, the fund managers are supposed to be actively selecting investments that will allow you to do better for a fee than what you could do all on your own by just investing in the index.
Yeah. So some of our listeners are probably having some antennas go up right now and go, wait a minute, they'd have to tell me if they were charging me those extra costs, right?
No, they don't. What they have to do is they have to hand you a prospectus, which can be hundreds of pages, and you're required to then read the hundreds of pages, which in my entire career, I've never had a client who's read one through. I have as an advisor, but we kind of stay away from products that involve reading through hundreds of pages just to figure out what's going on. And inside those hundreds of pages, there are sections about fees. And what I found is it's the minority of brokers who will actually take the time to hold the client's hand and walk them through all of those fees.
Because they're not legally obligated to, because it's disclosed in the prospectus? Is that why?
They don't have to say them out loud. That's right.
Yeah. So basically, it sounds like, people are not fully understanding what they're getting. Almost like if they downloaded an app and they said, do you agree to the terms and conditions? And somebody, instead of opens the terms and conditions, which are like, they just hit agree and go on. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, that's kind of how it happens, unfortunately.
So when someone comes into the Lord & Richard's office, that experience is hopefully different, right?
Yeah, it's radically different. For starters, we're going to bring those fees back out into the light of day. So we're going to conduct a full analysis and show you what those fees are. There are charges for many of these types of funds when you go into them. They're called loads, and they can amount to quite a bit. 5% all on their own of your money gone up front. So if you put in $100 now, you're starting from 95. And you have to rebuild that. When I was a young college student, I had a little bit of money that I wanted to invest, and I went out and found some random guy, and he immediately put me into an upfront loaded fund, and I started with 5% less money than I had when I walked in the door.
Yeah.
And on top of loads, you can have back-end loads then, charges that when you come out of the vehicle, you're going to be charged. And then you can have fees and costs related to marketing the materials. So this mutual fund is trying to recover all the costs that it took to advertise. So we call those 12B1 fees, and the list goes on and on.
Yeah, I often think about that. That was my first experience coming out of college as well. My wife was working at a job. She got referred to this guy's financial advisor at her job. We went in there. Next thing you know, 5.75% coming off the front. In hindsight, I look at that and go, why would anybody agree to that? That seems crazy from a broker. And then I thought, well, the name is kind of ironic, broker, and I feel like I'm going broke from after having to deal with that, right?
You're a broker at the end of the meeting.
That's just crazy. So why would someone agree to that?
Well, when I was younger and more naive, I frankly didn't know there was a better way. And so it's not the people's fault. It's the fault of those who enter into this industry. And honestly, many of those brokers, some of them young, they don't know there's a better way. Often I will interview people from that side of the financial services industry, and they're shocked to discover the things that we can actually do for our clients. And many of them ask me for a job.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon, I think. And typically that's where I like to say that, the people aren't bad, it's just the institution that they're inside. And so they kind of have to do it based on what the institution tells them to. But one of the things you started to bring up, and we didn't get there yet, but there's the stated fees, but then there's unstated costs. And so how much of an impact can those trades have on your taxes and other situations that are going to be, hurting that portfolio?
So you said the key word there, which is trades. It's one thing if you're an investment advisor, which is a fiduciary, a different standard than a typical broker, and you're making a change in the investment selections that are for the good of the client. It's to change risk tolerance or to improve their investments. But it's another when you're a fund manager and you're having to respond to the news and the pressure that you're receiving, and you make trades all throughout the year, those individual trades can have costs for every single trade. Some of you might have dabbled with Scottrade and these kinds of things where you pay like $7 a trade. Well, it's not that much different inside these funds where there are costs to just make the trades. And those can typically result in turnover that is multiple hundreds of percent of the whole portfolio. So that means that that mutual fund is having the same stock being sold and then bought again multiple times, charging you each time. Then there's a whole other layer that is below the surface, and that's the taxation of those trades. So if we can set aside IRAs and 401ks a moment, because those taxes are all deferred, but if you have just normal non-IRA money, there may be a gain. Let's say you own Apple inside of there and the fund manager sells it. You now have a gain. And if you've owned that for less than a year, or if the fund has owned it for less than a year, even if no matter what the situation, you're going to be charged on what's called a short-term gain, or the ordinary income tax that you pay on income. If you've held that position for longer than a year, but the fund trades it shorter than a year, you still get taxed short-term gains. We want to be, when we're taxed, we want to be in the tax bracket of the smart, which is the capital gains bracket. And of course, the even smarter don't get taxed, and they use different tools other than mutual funds and high fee investments to accomplish their goals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, if we can mitigate taxes and then eliminate them, that would be great. But along the way, we don't want to be paying these really nasty fees that are dragging the portfolio down the whole way. So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about how we're going to solve that on the Lord and Richard Show, because we've opened up a can of worms talking about things you may have not realized. But when we come back, we're going to put some solutions in place.
Just pick up the phone and give us a call at 720-372-0400. That's 720-372-0400 for your complimentary retirement freedom review. Or check us out online at lordandrichards.com.
Welcome back to the Lord and Richard Show. Thank you all for joining us. I'm here, Dylan Schoonover, joined alongside Colin Richards, CEO and founder of Lord and Richards. And we are pleased to be back and talking about fees. Unfortunately, we uncovered some nasty truths there in the first segment, but now we're back to say, okay, there's some good news on the horizon, because Colin, one of the things a team can do at Lord and Richards is figure out what you're actually paying, not what you're told you're paying, but what you're actually paying. How do we go about that at Lord and Richards, explaining, what has been done to your portfolio and how we can potentially have some solutions?
So as part of what we call the Retirement Freedom Review, we sit down with you in a first visit, discover your goals, desires, and wants for retirement. That's the most important conversation. The tools themselves are less important than the destination we're trying to get to. And we need those tools, but they're not the critical factor. But once we figure out the destination, now we want to choose the best tools possible to get you there. And part of understanding where you are today and what you're doing before we know where we're going to go is understanding what you're paying for. So our team, between our first visit and our second visit together, are going to prepare a detailed analysis of many things about your portfolio, your situation, your taxes, and on and on. But one of those key areas is going to be a fee report. And all of our clients get one of those. They understand in full what they're actually paying and can make an informed and valuable decision about whether they want to continue to maintain those accounts depending on what the fees are. So that's the first step in the process.
Makes sense. What do you uncover typically in there? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of options for some potential roadblocks in portfolios.
Well, one of the problems is that in the industry, kind of Wall Street, we might call it, there's a tendency to be, I think, kind of lazy. I've mentioned this elsewhere, but less than 5% of people who broker themselves as brokers, financial advisors, representatives, all the different names, less than 5% actually do a true comprehensive plan for their clients. So somebody like me, like I shared in the other segment, comes in as a young college student or a young couple. We say, I've got a little bit of money here I want to set aside for the future. And they drop you into a model portfolio. Nothing wrong with models. It's kind of like when you buy a home and you see a model.
Sure.
But the problem is that those are kind of what we might call cookie cutter options, right? It's nice if you can afford a custom home. Now, a lot of times we associate customization with unnecessary costs, right? That model home will be just fine. But the problem is the model homes that most people are buying in the form of investments, mutual fund portfolios, start with owning the same thing many, many different times. So you've got mutual fund A, B, C. Each one of them has Microsoft in it. You might find that you own Microsoft. I've seen portfolios where people own one stock 15 different ways. That's not customization. That's not even efficient. And you've got it being bought by one portfolio and sold by another. Not a good idea. So customization in this case is about adapting the investments to your real retirement goals and needs. And that is worth taking the extra time and effort to go through. And that's the process we have at Lord & Richards called the Retirement Freedom Review.
And so when you put that all together, you're able to probably generate something that looks a lot more transparent for the client.
Absolutely. We actually, through just drawn diagrams as well as printed materials, bring all of the features as well as the drawbacks of every investment recommendation that's going to be in that plan right out into the light of day, right under the microscope so everybody can see it. We literally put down on paper, this is your fee if we were going to have an investment that has a fee. The cool part as well is that we have the ability to utilize investments that don't have fees to the clients. And those are obviously some of our clients' favorite types of investments.
Sure. I would imagine so. And that, along those lines, it's not uncommon that one spouse or the other will be more heavily involved in the investments. So talk about the importance of keeping it simple when you're actually giving that presentation, because it's a very complex situation to get all this information to the client, but you deliver it in a way that's quite simple.
Yeah, I'll use an analogy. So my wife is ready for a vehicle. And we're at the point where we're ready to write a check or finance or whatever we choose to do, but we're ready to buy. And just last weekend, my wife went into a dealership of a very well-known car brand where you would expect to have great service, and wandered around for a while before someone even came up and approached her and said, can I help you? And she says, yeah, I'm here to buy a car. And for some reason, often in the investment world, I feel like our ladies get short shrift. They sometimes are not treated well by certain advisors, or if, let's say, the husband is into investing and the wife's not, the advisor may willingly or most likely unwittingly talk over their head. I think that's a big mistake. Women control more money on earth than the men multiple times over. One of the reasons why is they outlive men.
Yep.
It's just one of the genetic lottery things.
We're dying sooner.
Yep, that's right. And so with that reality, it would be wise for financial professionals to begin to take ladies more seriously. But it can be the other way around. I've also been in cases where perhaps in a married situation, the wife was maybe more financially savvy. For me, I want to present everything as if it's the first time people have had opportunity to hear this in a simple, easy to understand way, just like we're talking today, that doesn't use a lot of jargon. When you have an advisor talk over your head or use jargon or ignore you, or even especially dismiss your wishes, then it's time to start thinking about making a change.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And let's go to break. And when we come back from break, we'll talk about how you choose to work with an advisor and questions you ask your current advisor to see if some of this stuff is going on. So we'll be back shortly. You're watching The Lord & Richards Show.
Just pick up the phone and give us a call at 720-372-0400. That's 720-372-0400 for your complimentary Retirement Freedom Review. Or check us out online at lordandrichards.com.
Welcome back to the Lord & Richards Show. I'm Dylan Schoonover, joined alongside CEO and founder Colin Richards. And Colin, I don't know what's more scary, people at Halloween or the fees that sit in portfolios sometimes. It is just some nightmare horror stories out there that you've seen. Give us a few that have been exceptionally egregious.
Well, it doesn't take long. We've talked about different types of investments. I've seen fees north of 5 and 6% in certain types of financial tools. But what happens most of the time is people aren't aware of it. It'd be one thing if somebody disclosed that to you and said, but here are the benefits and you decide. But most of us never get the chance to do that. And with a populace that has more important things to do than read 900-page prospectuses, I think what needs to happen is that an advisor is transparent, open, and you as the investor or the client need to come armed and ready to ask the questions that every advisor should be ready to answer.
Yeah, and people say, well, it's just 1% or maybe 2%, is that really that big of a deal? And what I would say is if you look at the average retiree, let's say a 60-year-old couple walked into our office, and one of them's probably going to live to 90, probably going to be the woman, as you highlighted before the break, but $300,000, let's say they had a modest amount of $300,000 saved, and they got an average rate of return over 30 years. Well, if they save 1% in fees, they could be looking at, having that portfolio that maybe would have grown to $1 million with the extra percent being at 1.4 million. I think that 400,000 would come in pretty handy for, say, them with some long-term care needs or possibly their heirs if they were going to pass it down. But people don't realize that.
Yeah, you're right, Dylan. And that's your money. So when you pay a fee, that is your money that you're giving out. It's not the advisor's money. It's not the mutual fund's money. And so at Lord & Richards, when we talk about reducing not only things like taxes, but also fees, we start to compound on each other. So if we're at the same time that we're trying to reduce taxes, we're also reducing fees, we're compounding in the right direction. There's a good kind of compounding, but there's also a bad kind of compounding, the kind where during a down market, I'm paying excessive fees, I'm paying excessive taxes, and I'm withdrawing my money at the same time. That's a recipe for disaster.
It sure is. And, obviously we're thankful and we're proud that we do things the right way, obviously operating as a fiduciary, as you said, working in the best interest of the client first and foremost. But if you're not working with Lord & Richards right now, there's some questions you need to ask your advisor. And what are some of those things that you would start with if you had to, say, hey, you might want to ask about this?
Yeah, well, I'd start with what are all the fees that I'm paying right now, and I would insist on a detailed analysis of that. Or, even better, get an objective second opinion. Years ago, my wife was in a car accident, unfortunately. She was hit by somebody who turned in front of her. And as a result of that accident, she had a lot of pain and so forth. And I remember that she was referred to a surgeon who was going to have to fuse vertebrae in her neck. And so she had all this pain in her neck. And we went home for Christmas before she was scheduled to have that surgery. And her mother had bought a new item, something we see all over the place now, but back then it was new, called a memory foam pillow. Have you ever used one?
What time was this?
This is back in the 90s.
In the 90s. I was thinking slinky in my head at first, but I didn't know what you were going to do with a slinky. But
yeah, it's fun for a girl and a boy, right?
Yes,
we know our jingles, don't we? Well, so was this foam pillow. So my wife put her head on that while we were at her parents' house for Christmas break, and the pain in her neck literally went away.
Wow.
Yeah, I was gone. No, I'm kidding. The physical pain.
The memory of you when it went out.
Yes, that's right. But no, the physical pain that she was experiencing went away because she got better alignment. And she, by using that memory foam pillow now for years and years, decades, never had to go in for that surgery. So I always like to say, mama knows best for starters. But secondly, you can't get a second opinion from the person who gave you the first. So when it comes to issues like fees, you may have to step out and, consult somebody like Lord & Richards to give you that second opinion. But there are a lot of other questions that you can ask of your advisor. And that may be, first of all, what are the tools that you don't use when building my financial plan? That will tell you a lot about whether that advisor has chosen to be a fiduciary and access the entire universe, or whether they've chosen to be kind of a product salesperson.
Yeah, and the reality is we didn't get into it heavily in the segment today, but the reality is that some people can only offer certain things. Some people can only offer insurance. Some people at banks only have a few products they can offer at the bank. Some people that are in the investment world only have a portfolio they can offer, and that's not the way Lord & Richards operates.
No, we tap into all the available channels of potential resources that we can use for our clients. We even have some fancy-pantsy stuff that folks might be interested in, such as things that you might use like private equity, real estate investment, and other types of things that you don't typically get. But you know what? You don't have to have fancy stuff to be successful. But what we've just chosen to do is to go that extra mile and access all the most important resources that you need to succeed in your retirement plan.
So in summary today, as we're coming to a close on this segment, for those that have heard some information today for the first time and have them going, oh my, I need to figure out what's what. And unfortunately, the reality is a lot of them probably for 20 to 30 years could potentially have been paying far too much in their investments, right?
That's true. It's not a subject I like to dwell on. There's a biblical principle called forgetting what's behind, reaching forward. When I meet with clients, there is sometimes a note of regret, which I'm not trying to pound on, over maybe things that weren't great in their portfolio or their plan. But here's what I say. Today is a new day. It's an opportunity for you to take a step forward. Let's not focus on the past. Let's focus on reducing or eliminating fees, reducing or eliminating taxes, maximizing abundant and readily available income sources that are built on safe, secure platforms. And let's focus on developing a comprehensive plan that looks in advance at every possible way that your retirement could be derailed and protects you from that.
Yeah, and let's get that started today. If you need a comprehensive plan, which you all do, if you haven't got one, please give us a call or join us online at lordandrichards.com to set up a time to have a complimentary consultation to be able to take a look at what you're paying in your portfolio, and we can get that corrected very soon. We'll look forward to seeing you next time on the Lord and Richards Show.
Just pick up the phone and give us a call at 720-372-0400. That's 720-372-0400 for your complimentary retirement freedom review. Or check us out online at lordandrichards.com.
Investment advisory services offered through Lord and Richards Wealth Management, a registered investment advisor.